Well, good morning. It's kind of interesting. My name's Mike Tebow, but it's kind of interesting. I'm always used, senators, and we're going to introduce you, but I'm always used to being in your chair, talking to you, and several others up here made that comment. So this role reversal is a challenge, but welcome. I'm Mike Tebow. I'm the co-chair of the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan. My fellow co-chair, Grant Green, couldn't be with us today, but joins me in welcoming our distinguished witnesses from the Senate and the Inspector General community and all of our other guests to this first public hearing of the Commission on Wartime Contracting. We will hold other hearings in other venues, but it's truly fitting that our first hearing should take place in this majestic room. Starting in 1941, before the nation had the benefit of a professional community of inspectors general, this location hosted many of the hearings of the Truman Committee. Our commission follows in the distinguished tradition of the Truman Committee that so aggressively rooted out waste and fraud in federal spending. The Truman Committee began its work at the outset of World War II when there was acute public concern about wartime profiteering. Led by then Senator Harry Truman of Missouri, the committee turned a public spotlight on huge sums of taxpayer money lost to contract fraud. Their focus expanded over subsequent decades to the all-too-common phrase, waste, fraud, and abuse. As we know from many investigations and hearings, America's wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have unfortunately also involved billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. Saying that means no disrespect to the sacrifice and devotion of American troops or to those contractors who responsibly provide goods and services to the government and the armed forces. The record is, however, littered with too many examples of buildings unfit for use, projects that can't be maintained at original scope and cost estimates, weapons and money gone missing, and outright fraud on the U.S. taxpayer. Like the Truman Committee, the Commission on Wartime Contracting's reason for existence is to ensure that the government pays fair and reasonable prices for the goods and services that it buys to support our warfighters and receives full value as goods are deployed and services are rendered. This commission will also fully identify and disclose those conditions that have led to inefficient, ineffective, and inappropriate contracting practices. Our work must take note of the dramatic changes in the use of contractors in combat zones in the past 2 decades. Contractors are now literally in the center of the battlefield in unprecedented numbers. In prior wars, soldiers and Marines protected bases and the battlefield as others in the military engaged with and pursued the enemy. Today, dining facilities, motor pools, aircraft maintenance shops, and other support, even at forward bases, are typically operated by contractors. Contractors even fly aircraft in combat zones and provide security in support of ongoing military operations. The battlefield's changed. One of the Commission's tasks is to consider whether the battlefield has changed too much and whether some jobs and functions should be reserved for military and government employees only. The Commission on Wartime Contracting was created by the 110th Congress. The first commissioners were appointed in July 2008. At that time, we had no office, no staff, no technical support, and no plan of work. Through the fall and early winter, we have filled those voids and are moving ahead. Our mandate is broad and will be carried out in a cooperative, bipartisan fashion. We're to consider federal reliance on contracting, contractor performance and accountability, contractor use of force, contract management and oversight by government agencies, waste, fraud, and abuse, and potential illegal or legal violations relating to operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. We are not interested in witch hunts or catering to personal agendas or staging new debates on old decisions, except insofar as looking at those decisions can lead to an improved decision-making process in the future. We want to make things better, both for the conduct of current operations and for the support of future commitments of American support. I will stress that this is an independent commission. We've already reached out to many public interest groups or interested parties in government, business, and public interest organizations, and we will continue to do so. But our report will reflect our conclusions. No one outside the group of 8 duly appointed commissioners will censor or wield veto power over our work. Having said that, let me assure you that the Commission on Wartime Contracting does not intend to duplicate solid work already performed. One of our tasks, in fact, is to conduct a thorough review of existing literature of investigations of wartime contracting to identify lessons learned, best practices identified, and recommendations for reform, and to establish a comprehensive research library. Performing that task will be greatly eased by the excellent work performed by many inspectors general. During World War II, there was no community of IG as we know it today, and certainly nothing like the Special Inspector General for Iraq and Afghanistan, or Iraq Reconstruction, or SIGIR. Today we have the benefit of cops on the beat in the Inspector General community. This hearing is about listening to 4 key Inspectors General who work to protect the public interest. They and their staff have literally walked the battlefield in pursuit of inefficient contracting practices and potential wrongdoing. They've suffered hardships and they have taken casualties. As you will hear today, their perspectives carry power and insight. This commission must consider this body of work. Noteworthy among those commissions is the final hard lessons, which is kind of like a textbook, and it's that comprehensive report that is being released and that we'll hear about by SIGIR today. Today we will hear from 3 key senators who support the commission mandate. They will share their own concerns and perspectives and recommendations to the commission. We're conducting this hearing as guests of the Senate. We will also hear from 4 of the 5 key inspectors general who have been auditing contracts. Future hearings will also include testimony from the 5th, the recently appointed Special Inspector General for Afghanistan. In future hearings, we will hear testimony from the Government Accountability Office and from other critically important oversight organizations. Future hearings will consider and has to consider research and findings of selected public interest groups and nonprofit, non-governmental organizations. Throughout each of these hearings, the Commission will focus on each of the key areas specified in our mandate. Lastly, our future research and hearings will also include reaching out to and gathering testimony from the contractor community. This is important. Contractors undertake to fulfill contract terms and conditions that they've agreed to in accordance with federal procurement regulations and statutes. Their process observations and battlefield experiences can give us additional information to improve contingency contracting. Now I'm pleased to call upon our first panel of witnesses, 3 senators with great experience and interest and leadership in federal acquisition matters. They are Senator Susan Collins from Maine, Senator Claire McCaskill from Missouri, and Senator James Webb of Virginia. Senators Webb and McCaskill were the original Senate sponsors of the legislation creating this commission, the reason we are here today. And as we heard just a few days ago, Senator McCaskill has been named as chair of the new ad hoc subcommittee on contracting oversight within the Senate Home Security and Government Affairs Committee. So we know we'll be working with you, ma'am. Senator Collins has served as chair and ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee. She's led hearings and crafted legislation on acquisition and contracting reform. We're here today because of these senators' leadership and attention to the contracting issues associated with the execution and cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've served the national interest, the U.S. military, and the American taxpayer as well. Welcome to you all. Senator Collins, please begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of this distinguished commission. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify before you this morning, and I'm particularly pleased to join my 2 colleagues who, as Chairman Thibault pointed out, were instrumental in the establishment of this commission. Ensuring the best value for the American taxpayer in government procurements is important under the best of circumstances, but it is absolutely crucial when our nation is at war and takes on reconstruction efforts such as those in Iraq and Afghanistan. As this commission undertakes its review of the failures associated with those reconstruction efforts, I would encourage you to address a fundamental question. Are the military, diplomatic, and foreign aid goals of the United States being advanced through our wartime reconstruction contracts? That is, after all, the reason that we enter into these contracts. Unfortunately, beset by waste, fraud, and failure, reconstruction efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan too often have failed to support the mission of the United States in these nations. As you begin your examination of this topic, I commend to you the work of the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, whom the chairman has already mentioned. I strongly supported with Senator Russ Feingold the creation of this important office, and I joined him in expanding its mission and defending it against efforts to terminate its crucial work. Stuart Bowen and his staff of skilled auditors and investigators, many serving in harm's way in Iraq, have proven time and again to be a much-needed watchdog over taxpayers' dollars. So you will have no greater ally as you undertake your investigation than Mr. Bowen and his staff. And I commend to you the latest report, Hard Lessons, which reviews the Iraq reconstruction experience from mid-2002 through the fall of 2008. It's a tough, no-holds-barred report that will give you tremendous insight. As this new report underscores, our nation's reconstruction efforts during the past 6 years in Iraq have been plagued by waste and abuse. Examples of unsuccessful contracting practices and poor contract execution and oversight abound. Based on the work that the Homeland Security Committee has done, however, I believe that the failures can be boiled down to 4 categories. First, unclear and evolving contract requirements. Second, poor program management, including an inadequate number of skilled contracting personnel. Third, an unstable security environment. And fourth, a lack of commitment by Iraqi government officials to the reconstruction of their own nations. I'd like to discuss each of these 4 issues. Untimely and unclear requirements hampered our nation's security efforts in Iraq from the start. During the first big push by the Coalition Provisional Authority to stand up the Iraqi police force, we found that program managers failed to set timely and exact requirements for many goods and services, even for something as simple as winter coats. Orders for these coats were not placed until mid-November, and deliveries were not completed until February. Meanwhile, sub-freezing temperatures gripped northern Iraq. Under these conditions, it was unrealistic to assume that the ill-equipped Iraqi police force could provide effective security in the north. I mention that example because if a contract to buy winter coats could not be executed successfully, it shows you the depth of the contracting problems. The second issue, poor scoping and management of contracts, also led to waste and abuse. The Special Inspector General reviewed Department of Defense records and identified more than 1,200 projects that were terminated, 732 for the convenience of the government and 530 for contractor default. These terminated projects had initial obligations of nearly $1 billion. Approximately $600 million had been paid to contractors, including nearly $90 million to contractors for projects terminated for default. Terminations for convenience were often due to changes in scope or security problems. Terminations for default were normally due to poor contractor and subcontractor performance. And it is very troubling that there were very few attempts made or underway even now to recoup the payments from contractors that defaulted. Incredibly, at least 2 contractors that were terminated for default were subsequently rehired for other jobs. An egregious example of poor scoping and management is the Fallujah wastewater treatment system. This important project cost 3 times the original estimates, will be completed 3 years late, and will serve just 1/3 of the number of homes originally contemplated. Thus, a project with a $32.5 million price tag will end up costing taxpayers nearly $98 million. In many ways, these failures can be traced to a key underlying reason. And as I talked with Ms. Gustitis, this isn't glamorous, but it's at the heart of the problem, and that is an inadequate number of skilled government contracting personnel in Iraq. The Special Inspector General's report painfully illustrates the failure of a key office, the Program Management Office, to successfully oversee $18.4 billion in American reconstruction contracts in Iraq, due in large measure to a lack of staff. When the Program Management Office was established in September of 2003, it had a staff of one. In the summer of 2004, 20 months later, it had only hired half of the staff estimated to be needed to oversee more than 2,000 reconstruction contracts. At that time, the PMO had roughly 1 government employee for every $400 million that it was overseeing. How could effective and thorough oversight and accountability be expected with this ratio of workload to qualified staff? The Iraqis themselves also failed to take responsibility for completed reconstruction projects that were turned over to them. A recent IG report on the Baghdad police training facility detailed the failure of the Iraqis to adequately protect and maintain that project. When transferred to the Iraqis, this was a project operating at full capacity. This wasn't an example of a poorly constructed project. It was serving over 3,200 cadets in 8 barracks. Due to vandalism, theft, and a lack of routine maintenance after the transfer to the Iraqis, the facilities fell into a state of disrepair. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about this, but it basically had large parts of it had to be shut down. Theft of plumbing, heating, and ventilating equipment, lack of repairs, and poor maintenance resulted in potential health hazards. Progress has been made on this front. Last year, Senators Ben Nelson and Evan Bayh and I authored legislation to require the Iraqis to assume responsibility for more of their own reconstruction so that they will have a stake in it. And I think that will help ensure that reconstruction projects are the ones the Iraqis really want and will maintain going forward. In the 6 years since the first Iraq supplemental was passed, Congress has also taken action to improve acquisition and reconstruction projects. Our Homeland Security Committee has really focused on this issue. We've worked hard. Legislation that I co-authored with Senator Lieberman and Senator McCaskill was signed into law as part of the last two Defense Authorization Acts, but implementation is going to be key. The reforms in our bill will provide greater competition, accountability, and transparency. It mandates additional public disclosure, curtails sole source contracting, limits the tiering of subcontractors, which we found to be a problem, places strict time limits on non-competitive contracts, and prevents bonuses to poorly performing contractors. Our bill also establishes a contingency contracting corps. The concept is that when we have an emergency situation, such as in the wake of Hurricane Katrina or in a reconstruction project such as in Iraq, that we would bring together skilled contracting officers from across the government who would be ready to be deployed. And finally, Senator Lieberman and I mandated the development of a strategic plan to revitalize our federal acquisition workforce. These reforms, forged from the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, in in disaster recovery following Hurricane Katrina, and through our investigations and reviews of more routine government procurements, should help to ensure that goods and services purchased by the government are truly the best value for the American taxpayer. And this is so important because last year the federal government spent $532 billion last year alone in contracts, and that is a 140% increase from 2001 to 2008. This commission's work will help us learn other important lessons from our government's procurement practices. Your findings and recommendations will play a central role, and they come at a watershed moment for America's mission in both Iraq and Afghanistan. As the responsibility for Iraq reconstruction slowly but surely shifts to the Iraqis, the United States mission in Afghanistan is set to increase. So what can be done to prevent the new money sent to Afghanistan from suffering the same fate as funds previously wasted in Iraq? Two immediate priorities are clear. First, which I've mentioned, our nation must revitalize its acquisition workforce. And second, we must continue to improve the management of federal procurements. Let me just end my comments by giving you a few more statistics on the federal acquisition workforce. We are entering the 21st century with 22% fewer federal civilian acquisition personnel than we had at the start of the 1990s. The Defense Department, which clearly spends more than any other department on acquisition, saw its acquisition workforce shrink by more than 50% between 1994 and 2005. Moreover, as early as 2012, 50% of the entire procurement workforce in the federal government will be eligible to retire. Think of the loss of expertise we are facing. The gap between the work to be done and the staff to do it is eerily reminiscent of the workforce challenges that our government faced in Iraq. As Mr. Bowen has outlined in Hard Lessons, when there are too few eyes on too much money, the risk for waste, fraud, abuse, and failure is high. So my urging to you is to take a hard look at the implementation of the hard-fought reforms that we put into the law, but also at rebuilding the acquisition workforce. The Commission's work in this area is vital because, in simplest terms, how well we execute wartime contracting helps to determine how well we build the peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Webb, I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce you with some of your walk and your history. It's something I want to do, and if there's one person in this room who doesn't know that walk, then I'm pleased to make these comments. But to be able to look truly at contracting and support of the warfighter, there's a tremendous advantage in having made that walk. And sir, I tip my personal hat and my thanks of the commission. Senator Webb earned and was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest commendation in the Marine Corps. He earned and was awarded 2 Silver Stars, the third highest commendation in the military. And he earned and was awarded 2 Purple Hearts for being wounded in action. There just aren't very many experiences and pedigrees of that sort. And so, sir, I know you're at the stage now where you're providing leadership, but I thank you for coming up and sharing your comments today and for your own walk in support of warfighting, or warfighter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I only earned 1 Silver Star. I appreciate very much Chairman Thibault and other commissioners the opportunity to appear before you today, along with Senators McCaskill and Collins, and I want to express my appreciation for Senator Collins' remarks and for her commitment to help this panel do its work and truly make it a bipartisan effort from our side as well. I know Senator John Warner, recently departed, was a big supporter of what we're trying to do. He is with us in spirit, although no longer in person. So, Senator Collins, we very much appreciate your commitment here. It's been about 2 years since Senator McCaskill and I joined together to introduce the legislation to create this commission, and I think the Senate and the country are going to benefit greatly from her continuing work chairing this subcommittee on Homeland Security, and I've been very appreciative of her background in the area of auditing and government auditing, and as a member of the Armed Services Committee as we work to put this into place. We put the bill in a couple of years ago. It's been a little more than a year since we were able to get the bill brought into law, again with the assistance of Senator John Warner. And I'd like to thank all of you and the staff that you put together and the other federal government employees and personnel who signed on in order to satisfy the broad mandate of this commission and hopefully to bring some order into this process. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, this room is a very fitting place to have these hearings, not just because of the Truman Committee hearings, but also this is the room where they held hearings on Wall Street banking practices in the 1930s. We might think about that hearing these days. It's the room where the Senate investigated labor union racketeering in the 1950s, where we examined the consequences of the Watergate break-in in the 1970s, and where hearings were held with respect to the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s. So there have been a lot of words, a lot of important decisions, a lot of considerations made in this room. And y'all look pretty crowded up there on this platform. And let me say, I would be the first to recommend that you get at least one more table and to be able to spread out a little bit and get your papers in place. What you're doing, in my view, ranks as one of the most important oversight obligations that we face today. Let's start with the premise that every interested American knows that there was rampant fraud, waste, and abuse following the invasion of Iraq. They all know it. And They want us to demonstrate that we're willing to do something about it, not simply in terms of process, but in terms of accountability. We do want to eliminate the systemic deficiencies associated with war support contracting through needed reforms to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, and to hold people accountable. But there's also another need here, I think a very urgent need right now when you see where the country is, and that is to restore public trust in our process. Without that kind of trust, it impacts every other thing we're trying to do and every piece of legislation that we vote on. So I wish you well, and I'm hoping that you will, now that the pieces of this have been assembled and that you've had a number of preliminary hearings, I hope you will be very aggressive in both of those areas. We are conducting this process with the reality that federal contracting itself has grown exponentially since 9/11. Congressman Waxman did a study in 2006 that pointed out that federal contracting had exploded from $203 billion in the year 2000 to $377 billion by 2005, and continuing to grow. That's almost a 100% increase. These contracts that were not subject to full and open competition grew from $67 billion to $145 billion during that same period, an increase of more than 100%. And it was estimated a year ago, I haven't seen the more recent estimates, that there were more contractors in Iraq than military people. 180,000 as of a year ago, and 161,000 military people. So it's natural that systemic problems would emerge. They're well documented. They include a vastly expanded reliance on contractors to fill what should be inherently governmental functions, security in a combat area, as the Chairman mentioned many of these, tactical training for military people, poorly defined requirements and insufficient competition has emerged, inadequate government oversight owing to a lack of properly trained personnel in sufficient numbers to the task, extensive waste, fraud, and abuse, which I hope we can examine. One of the things that I've heard frequently over the past couple of years sitting on the Armed Services Committee is a description of the total force as active, Guard, Reserve, and defense contractors. I never heard that in the time that I was in the military or the time that Dov Zakheim and I served together in the Pentagon. The total force at the beginning was supposed to be active, Guard and Reserve, and career civilian force. And defense contractors were the default position. If that total force didn't hold, or if you had temporary assignments, then you would go to the civilian contractors. And this process, I think, by its own momentum and by the fact that there were urgent needs out there that had to be filled, has become changed. And we need to examine whether those changes have been good. There's clearly a proper role for the important work that contractors provide, but the pendulum, I believe, has swung way too far. And I've tried to put a number of things on the table with DOD witnesses over the past couple of years, because I believe strongly that, contrary to popular mythology, the extended reliance on wartime support contractors does not always save money. It's not always the most cost-effective solution. It's simply been the easiest solution sometimes with the momentum of policy decisions. So in closing, I would again want to congratulate you and thank you for your work, to underscore the importance of what you're doing, to ask that you be aggressive in satisfying your statutory mandate. Our taxpayers and the people who are serving deserve nothing less. And I also would like to emphasize something that Senator McCaskill and I said in our letter of last week, and that is that we want this to work. We deliberately sunsetted it. We didn't want this thing to go on forever, but if the resources and the tools at your disposal are not sufficient, now that you're this close, you need to let us know. We want to ensure that you get the cooperation that you need. We want to ensure that you're able to bring accountability in the areas where accountability should be brought. If that, I'm not proposing this, but if that involves extending the timeline a bit or getting subpoena authority or any other area that will make this successful, please let us know. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McCaskill, I personally also appreciate your background as Auditor General. You know, you've made the walk through the state of Missouri, and you've brought it forward pretty clear in your advocacy of reform and better contracting practices. On this commission, we have counsel, we have people that have worked for Senate and House investigative organizations, we have ex-inspector generals, we have financial executives, but we only have one contract auditor, and that's myself. So I feel a little kindred spirit there, ma'am, and with that I would thank you and ask you to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and all of the commissioners. I think your public service is something that I hope people will be talking about in this room 20, 30 years from now as they go through the history of the investigative and public policy work that's done in this room. I'm very hopeful that this great group of people can put together that kind of historic effort. I want to thank Senator Webb, and I will tell you that he's my friend, and he gets very uncomfortable when people say nice things about him, Mr. Chairman, so watch that in the future. He doesn't like it. It makes him nervous. I want to thank Susan Collins for being such a soldier for appropriate contracting practices in the government. She has been laboring in these fields long before Jim Webb and I arrived, and she should get appropriate recognition for her yeoman's work in this area. I also want to thank the Inspector General community, and I want to thank the whistleblowers. And I think that those two groups of people should remain in our thoughts and in your work, because there is so much that has been done and can be done on the backs of hours and hours and hours of their laboring in this area. As I thought about what I was going to say today, I thought a lot about Harry Truman. And let me just tell you, Harry Truman has been rolling in his grave for the last 5 years. He, in fact, has been in constant motion in his grave. He is astounded that we allowed this problem to get this far out of control. This has been a massive failure. We have failed our military, and we have failed the American people. And a report is not going to be enough. You're going to need a 2x4. I'm going to try to channel the plain speaking of Harry Truman today, because I think that's what he would want. You're going to have to do something other than just write out summaries of other reports that have been done. Because what is missing in this failure is accountability. People need to remember that a general went to jail after Harry Truman finished his work, after World War II. And the problems of contracting and war profiteering in World War II were nothing compared to what we're facing. Hundreds and billions of dollars have disappeared. Everything has been stolen, from money to heavy equipment to guns. And the scandalous part about the guns that we didn't keep track of is that people in the military will tell you that they are confident that our weapons were stolen, sold, and used against our own soldiers. If we do not find accountability, then really we have added to the problem of wasting taxpayers' money. Now, I am not saying that you all have been designed or are supposed to go on some kind of witch hunt, as you said, Mr. Chairman. On the other hand, if you don't end up with a clear beacon of accountability going forward, then we haven't accomplished anything. Contractors have no accountability. Our military leaders have no accountability. As one high-ranking military leader in Kuwait said to me, I wanted 3 kinds of ice cream in the mess hall. I didn't care what it cost. The mission was so important to our military leaders, and their leadership is so stellar. They didn't see contract oversight as part of their mission. They didn't think it was that important. And that's how this problem grew exponentially and scandalously as this conflict in Iraq continued. Truth be known, we didn't have the force to do the job. And contracting was the shortcut to try to get us there. If you can come with answers on the accountability question, you will have done yeoman's work for the American people. You will have done something that no one else has been able to do. Now, I would like to spend just a minute before I finish on the bipartisan nature of your group. There are those in Congress that wanted this contracting commission to be a committee of the Congress, made up of senators or congressmen or women. There are those that wanted it to be a joint committee between the 2 houses. There are those that thought it was important that we do that with elected officials. Senator Webb and I spent a great deal of time talking about that. And we wanted desperately this not to be a political exercise. We wanted this to be bipartisan. We wanted this to be about policy. And so we did something that a lot of folks around here told us we were crazy to do. We made it 4-4. There's no tiebreaker on your commission. There are 4 members that are appointed by Democratic members of Congress, and there are 4 members that are appointed by the other party. I am hopeful that the Republican co-chairman will be appointed soon. I'm discouraged that that appointment has not been made yet. This is urgent. This should be important. We need to get the Republican co-chairman in place yesterday. And as you move forward with 4-4, then all you've got to do is what's right. None of you run for office. None of you are looking for votes. You can do your work without fear or favor. You can do what's right and not worry about the political consequences. And that's the pep talk I wanted to come and give you today. You are a truly bipartisan group. Frankly, as long as I don't think you should worry who toes you step on, whether it's this administration or the last administration or future administrations or 4 administrations ago. This should be about fixing this problem. It is too big and too important not to do it. I know that we all, Republicans and Democrats alike, stand ready to help any way we can in your work. I encourage you to have a lot of hearings, not just a few. I encourage you, if you need more time, to ask for it. And most of all, I encourage you to come out with a report that will be read by very few. And I also encourage you to come out with a report that we can take and implement and make sure that we've made a difference. Because if this is one more report sitting on someone's bookshelf somewhere, then we have failed also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Senators. We're going to take about a 5-minute pause to ask the Special IG for Iraq Reconstruction to join us, and thank you again, Senators. We needed to hear that.
Thank you.